Before you start learning about more specific topics, it might be helpful to explain what research methods are and why it matters. This is one diagram of the scientific method. It's from the Research Methods in Psychology book that was one of the resources in the last module and will be one of the main resources for this module. As you look at the steps, they might seem familiar. You might have seen something similar in your other classes, maybe even as early as elementary school. There are several ways to depict the process and different names for the step, but overall, the idea is the same. The process itself begins with informal observations or problems that lead to the research question. In many cases, that leads to a potential researcher to find scholarly sources about the topic. That's the lower green arrow in this diagram. Sometimes the research literature answers the question and the person will move on, hence the fact that I referred to them as potential researchers. Sometimes, though, the literature confirms the question or leads to a prediction, also known as a hypothesis. Then a researcher designs a study to answer that question or test the prediction. The study generates data that's analyzed in order to draw conclusions. Research methods are the term we use to describe the parts of an empirical study. We're going to focus on two parts of the study, the participants and the variables. The specific methods for each study also represent what's called a research design, so you'll learn about that in this module as well. Since each study is based on a research question or hypothesis, this module will also help you understand the important points about that part of the research process. Although each research study in psychology includes the elements in the diagram in some way, researchers can take a number of perspectives when they make decisions about those elements. One important difference between perspectives is whether they're based on the quantitative model or the qualitative model. The points in this slide highlight the differences between the two. If you're listening to the recording, you might pause the slides to review this summary. I'll explain more as we walk through the related parts of the research designs, but our primary focus will be on concepts related to the quantitative model because it's the most common in psychology. I know this graphic is a little small to read in the slide, but it's another way to illustrate the steps in the research process and provide context for the terms and concepts in this module. It also illustrates the differences in the quantitative and qualitative perspectives. I'll walk through the steps and the differences between the two perspectives in research on the related recording for this module. For now, it might be helpful to note that we're talking about a process for generating knowledge, and each of the blue squares in this diagram represents a decision the researcher makes. But why are research methods important to understand? The short answer is because they're an essential part of the scientific method. The importance of the scientific method relates back to what you've learned so far about ways of knowing. The scientific method is a systematic approach to collecting and evaluating evidence, so it's another way that we can generate knowledge. It actually complements other ways of knowing, though, instead of being an alternative. Personal experiences are an important inspiration for the research questions, as is knowledge from other sources. At the same time, the scientific method is another anecdote for tenacity or persistence, or it should be, because it can lead to conclusions that are different than the researcher expected when they started. If you're a psychology major, you'll take other classes that help you understand this process from the perspective of the researcher. But at this point, you might be thinking, I'm not going to be a researcher. Why is this important to me? Good question. One reason is because it helps you understand why you might be asked to be a research participant and how important it is for people to say yes when they can. Our focus, though, will be on what you need to know to be a consumer of research. Earlier in class, I mentioned using PsycNet and PubMed to find article abstracts that help confirm a journal is reputable. Having access to those sites, which are freely available, also means anyone with an internet connection can find summaries of studies. Those can be incredibly valuable when we're considering a range of personal and professional questions. Understanding research methods also adds to your skills as a savvy skeptic. Each of the questions we considered in the previous modules relates to the process of designing and conducting a research study.